One of the leading figures of rock and roll, Jerry Lee Lewis, has died aged 87. His song, Great Balls of Fire, was a worldwide hit, and he was one of the original inductees in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. David Silito looks back at his life.
Whole lot of shaking going on. Yeah, come on, baby. Baby, you can't go wrong. Oh.
I think my talent is proving out to be what it is. The greatest talent in the field of music that I'm in.
If you ever wondered why rock and roll was called the devil's music, Jerry Lee Lewis is your answer. It was his piano playing that got him expelled from Bible college. Rock and roll was his escape from God-fearing southern poverty.
If you want to be an ass-dragging hillbilly singer, you can be one if you want to. But I would hate to put myself in that position. I'm rock and roll.
His parents had mortgaged their home to buy 8-year-old Jerry a piano. His father put him on the back of a truck and they put on shows at gas stations. However, the record companies in Nashville turned him down, but Sun Studios in Memphis saw his talent. He joined a roster of stars that included Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins and Elvis Presley. Whole Lot of Shakin', Great Balls of Fire. Shows could end in near riot conditions.
Were you there, Mrs. Lewis?
I was there, but I wasn't at the shows.
But it all came crashing down. He married Myra Gale Brown. She was his cousin, and she was 13.
When were you married? Well, we leave our personal questions out of this, sir.
The backlash against rock and roll was in full swing. Jerry Lee Lewis disappeared from the airwaves.
Help, Mr. Brown, please. You know I'm burning from my head to my knees.
But it didn't stop him performing. The record companies wanted to promote a family-friendly, cleaned-up rock and roll. Jerry Lee was always wild, always dangerous. Drink, drugs. In his home, you could count the bullet holes.
I didn't do right by you.
7 marriages. His life was a barely believable trail of death, divorce, drink, guns, and burning Cadillacs. His country songs came from the heart. But his soul?
I preached pretty heavy. And I said, man, I really can't be what I am and live up to what I'm doing. There's too many good-looking women out there, you know. So, I mean, I had to do my rock and roll thing. I'm still doing it. What's your problem?
Jerry Lee Lewis. His roots were God and gospel. But after a life such as this, he probably knew where he was going.
Jerry Lee Lewis, who's died at the age of 87, his agent describing him as perhaps the last great icon of the birth of rock and roll. Now let's say goodbye to our viewers on BBC World News. I'm delighted to say we can now speak to Leo Green, the saxophonist who played with Jerry Lee Lewis, joins us live now, having come off stage in central London tonight, especially to speak to us. Hi, Leo. Great to see you. Thanks very much for taking the time. Tell us about your memories of Jerry Lee Lewis and what it was like working with him.
Sure. Hi there, Samantha. Yeah, it's really weird just standing here listening to some of the tapes you're playing back, hearing his voice, because obviously some of those recordings were when he was really young. When I joined his band, I was like 19 years old. By that point, he was probably in his early 60s, and in his own description, he thought he was an old man, but he still had this incredible power when he sat behind a piano and started playing. And what everyone kind of maybe might not be aware of was that he was this phenomenon who defined rock and roll piano playing, but also, you know, we'd get on stage and he wouldn't tell you what you're going to play, but he'd also do country music. There were songs from musicals, there were blues, there was gospel. Of course, there was his rock and roll hits, but he was this incredible encyclopedia of knowledge, vocally and as a pianist. Just incredible. And looking back now, I can't really believe that I was so lucky enough. It was a fluke, really. There's plenty of people who are better than me. I was just lucky, right place, right time. And I was booked 3 nights with it.
Yeah, what was it like being so young and playing with such a legend? Was it intimidating?
I think I was probably too young to be intimidated. I'd gone from kind of practicing in my bedroom, playing along to Great Balls of Fire, and suddenly I was on stage with him, flying all over the world. I was so young and excited. And he was really generous with his time and would sit with the band. And of course, we'd all ask him all questions about Elvis and was this story true? Was that story true? But he was behind all the kind of showbiz. When you sat down with him, he just really wanted to sit and talk about music. He was just an obsessive about all kinds of music and an amazing knowledge of it all, you know.
Are there any of his stories that stick with you?
There's plenty. I mean, there was one night on stage, he threw a bottle of whiskey at me and I thought, what the hell's going on here? And he looked up and just winked at me. He did the same one night with a knife. I remember crazy things happening, and I've actually started writing all this stuff down, because if I don't, my kids are never going to believe me. But yeah, we toured all over the world, and the kinds of people that would turn up just to see him, you knew that you were in the presence of a man who wasn't just a rock and roll musician. He was a guy who, well, he defined the entire genre for everybody else to follow. An amazing guy.
Tell us what he was like, his personality, because he was well known for, having a bit of a temper, for drinking a lot. And, he admitted and accepted all of that, didn't he?
He was brutally honest about it. But I think by the time I joined him, he perhaps calmed down a little bit. He wasn't drinking much, and obviously there was no drugs going on. But I remember asking him one night, what on earth was it like, hanging out with Elvis? And was it true you went to his house and fired guns at his house and shot all the windows out? And he said, yeah, of course I did. He said, but, a few nights before that, Elvis drove to my house and he shot the gun in my windows. He said, that's what us Southern boys do. He said, I loved Elvis like a brother. And, he was this mount of information. You could talk to him about Elvis and music and the people that he influenced. He was never really aware and didn't really appreciate how much of an influence he was on everyone else. He just saw himself as this singer who had this kind of ridiculous ability, and he wasn't really sure what to do with it. He was torn. He was massively religious and was genuinely concerned he was going to burn for an eternity because of what he was doing on stage. So he was really genuinely tormented. That bit wasn't an act, but so many stories that he was genuine enough to share with us. Amazing guy.